Once upon a time, there was a king and queen who had no children, and that made the queen sad. One day, an old beggar woman came by the palace asking for money. The queen brought the beggar woman in and gave her wine and food, then asked her to help with her problem. The beggar woman told her to get 2 pails of water and wash herself in each one before she goes to bed, and then throw the water under her bed. Then, the next morning, 2 flowers will have sprung up, a beautiful flower and an ugly flower. The queen must eat the beautiful one but leave the ugly one. The queen bathed with the 2 pails and found the next morning 2 flowers, one ugly with black leaves and one bright and lovely. She ate the beautiful flower, but the flower tasted so sweet the queen could not help herself and ate the other flower too. The queen was then pregnant with twins. The first was born disgusting and ugly. The second was born beautiful and sweet. The elder twin was named Tatterhood, because she was always so ugly and ragged, and had a hood hung about her ears in tatters. The queen hated the sight of her, and tried to lock her up in a room alone, but she could not be apart from her twin. One Christmas Eve, there was a frightful noise in the hallway. Tatterhood asked about it, and the queen told her it was a pack of witches that had come. Tatterhood went out to drive them away. Off she went with her wooden spoon to hunt and drive away the hags. Her sister peeped her head out an open door to see how her sister was doing, and then pop came an old witch and whipped off her head and replaced it with a calf head, so the princess ran back to the room on all fours and began to moo like a calf. When Tatterhood returned and saw her sister, she set sail on the king's ship, with her sister alone to the island where the witches lived. She left her sister on the boat to stay quiet and rode her goat to the castle. She jumped through the open gallery window with her goat, snatched the head from the window frame, and was off. The witches flocked around her. Tatterhood beat them up with her wooden spoon, until the witches gave up. She returned and switched her sister's head, and together they traveled to a new realm. Now the king of this land was a widower, and had a son. The king's men found Tatterhood, and asked if anyone else was on the boat. She answered yes, but would not allow anyone to see her sister unless the king came himself. When the king came to meet the person riding a goat, she brought out her sister, and the king fell in love with her. The king brought the girls back and wanted her sister to be his queen, but Tatterhood said no, not unless his son takes her. The king's son did not want this because she was such an ugly hussy. However, the king's men talked him into it, and he promised to take her as his queen, but he became a sad man. The wedding was held at the church. The king left with his lovely bride, and people stopped and stared at her beauty along the road. Then came the prince on horseback, and Tatterhood by his side on her goat, with her wooden spoon in her fist. The prince looked as if he was heading into his own funeral and not his wedding. "Why don't you talk?" asked Tatterhood. "Why, what should I talk about?" answered the prince. "Well, you might at least ask me why I ride upon this ugly goat," she said. The prince asked about the ugly goat. She replied, saying, "It's the most beautiful horse that a bride ever rode." And in an instant, the goat became the finest horse the prince had ever seen. They rode in silence. Then she asked why he wouldn't speak again, and he asked her the same question. She asked him to ask her about the spoon. When the prince asked about the ugly spoon, she answered, "Is it an ugly spoon? Why, it's the loveliest silver fan that a bride ever carried." And in an instant it became a silver fan, so bright that it glistened. They rode in silence. Then she asked again why he wouldn't speak, and told him to ask her about the ugly hood. When the prince asked about the hood, she said, "Is it an ugly hood? Why, it's the brightest golden crown that a bride ever wore." And it became a crown at once. They rode in silence again, and Tatterhood told him to ask now why her face was so ugly and gray. "Yes," asked the prince, "why is your face so ugly and gray?" "Am I ugly? You think my sister is beautiful, but I am 10 times more beautiful," said the bride. And when the prince looked at her, she was so beautiful, he thought that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Then the prince never hung his head down again, and the couple set out to drink and party and feast.